And we are back here on the Analytical Iowan podcast. It is Saturday, January 10th, and recording this a little bit later in the day than I would like yet again. Probably not going to end up having it posted, hopefully before, but probably around the early morning hours of Sunday. Anyway, had some technical difficulties yesterday, as I talked about on the podcast. Was recording here on Zoom. And for whatever reason, I had paused it. I had to go deal with something real quick, came back to finish recording, and it just did not like my front camera. So I had to record it in two parts. Then I had to get that uploaded. And for whatever reason, I used to be way more tech savvy than I am. But when I combined the two clips, uh, it came up with like a 6 gig file, and it just took forever to get uploaded. But got it uploaded by midday and went about doing everything. Now, am working on keeping Spotify caught up. And if you are listening on Spotify, thank you for joining me over here. Going to continue to try to keep everything way more current. Now, we got a lot to talk about because there's always a lot to talk about. I say that almost every day. And one of the first stories I wanted to touch on was something I wrapped up yesterday's podcast with, and that is the story of Donald Trump trying to tackle affordability. And he wants to go through and limit credit card interest for 1 year to 10%. And it sounds good on its face when you think about it. Oh, yeah, well, credit cards interest is really high, limited it to 10%. But that really only helps people who are carrying a balance month to month and who are in a higher than 10% interest bracket. Now, I know several people who are in that category. I also know several people who will purposely take out a new card because they've got a 0% balance transfer and transfer their money over to a new card, and they play swap the card all the time, trying to save themselves interest money. It's going to help some people if they get it through and if they actually implement this. However, this is also Donald Trump. He flip flops on so many things, it is not funny. He could walk this back tomorrow for all we know. This came out on I think it was Truth Social, but it was on a social media post either way. And this also comes after last year, in the early months of this administration, he walked back and ended a Biden era rule that would limit all fees from credit card companies to $8. And it was also going to limit the amount of fees and how they could put those fees on and things like that. Because $8 is a reasonable fee for some of the stuff that um, these card companies charge. And if you're like me, you know how these things all work. You read through the fine print of credit card offers, etc., and they come through and say, well, we're going to charge you, if you're late on one payment, even by, a day, we're charging you a 34.99 fee or whatever the case may be. Well, why do they get a big fee like that on top of already getting all of the interest that they get to charge? In some cases, I've seen cards as high as 30, 34, 35%. And now, granted, that was in my younger days where I would get those offers and I never took them. But that was when I didn't have a lot of credit built up. And when you are struggling and you don't have access to good credit card companies like to take advantage. And one of the things that came out of the 2008 housing crisis was the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. Let me get that straight. And they are in charge of fixing how banks and other monetary entities work when it comes to lending and credit and all of those things. Okay. Before the 2008 housing crash, I remember getting card offers where, oh, yeah, we're going to offer you a $300 credit limit credit card. Oh, but right up front, you got to pay a one-time activation fee of $74.99 and a yearly fee of $174.99. By the time you're done, you've got $250 of your $300 in credit already used. Oh, and if you don't pay it off in a month, we're going to start charging you 27.99, 28.99, 34.99, something like that, some ridiculously high percentage rate. Now, again, I never took out those cards because I could read through between the lines and go, yeah, these are too expensive. I can't afford to be taking out those kind of payments. But when you have limited credit at the time, and I know people who took them out because they were convinced, well, this will be good for my credit. I take out the card, I pay off those fees, and then I've got access to $300 in credit I can spend whenever I want. Now, limiting credit to 10% on credit card fees could be a good thing. It could help some people, but it is not going to fix everything when it comes to affordability. It's just not. Things are outrageous and prices are out of control. Now, one of the things that would help with affordability would be to get rid of all of these tariffs, but he's not doing that. Donald Trump does not want to admit that his tariffs were a bad idea, despite all of the evidence to the contrary, uh, that prove him wrong. He will never admit it. Somebody got him stuck on the word tariff and told him how they work, or at least he figured out how he thinks they work, and you can't correct him. In the world of Donald Trump, a tariff works like this. You put the tariff on coming from a foreign country, and you say you're putting 50% on goods from China, for example. And then China, the country, when that product comes in from China, uh, they're the ones who pay the tariff. It goes from their treasury to the United States Treasury, and then that money sits on a shelf. Well, that's not how that works. Couple of reasons. One, the company that brings the item in from whatever foreign country we're talking about, and I'm going to say Walmart because they're one of the biggest retailers in the world, when they bring something in to this country, when it hits the dock or the airport or whatever, the port of entry, um, they pay the tariff on whatever that item is. Let's say it's a $10 item coming from China and there's a 50% tariff. They pay $5 to the US government, to customs, and then that money goes to the treasury. Okay. It is not paid by China. And then as it works its way through the supply chain through Walmart, for example, now instead of it costing that $10 item costing 10, now it costs 15. So instead of going on the shelf for $12, they're going to put it on the shelf for 17 or 18 to make up that $5 cost. And we've talked a lot about how those tariffs work. Um, but then as far as the money does not just go sit in the treasury and sit on a shelf where it doesn't get touched. No, it ends up going into the US Treasury and then it goes out immediately to pay a bill because we are in deficit spending and we have been in deficit spending for a long time. Last time we had a surplus was the Clinton administration. Now, for those of you my age and older, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago that it was the Clinton administration on some levels, but that was 25 years ago. That was over 25 years ago. And we haven't had a surplus since before 9/11. Okay. Um, Plain and simple, we've been in deficit spending this whole time. So what that means is we are spending out more money than we take in, and we have to borrow to go pay the bills, right? Well, when you borrow, you go ahead and you have to pay interest on that money you borrow. So that's what we're doing, right? We have to pay interest on the loans that we currently have in order just to keep those creditors happy that currently have uh, our bonds out, our loans. Now, who has our debt? Well, lots of countries around the world, including China, including our allies. And it has always been said that because the U.S. always pays its interest, even though we never actually pay off the debt, we make good on the interest. They have no problem lending the money. And I use this example a lot when it comes to Donald Trump trying to get more time for a lot of things. He likes to buy time, but it works in this case as well. I had a friend, or have a friend, who had a major problem, and he needed money. One month he was short on his bills, so he took some stuff to the pawn shop. Well, month went on, and then he gets to the end of the next month, still short on bills, didn't figure that out, and now he owes some interest on those items he took to the pawn shop. So he takes even more items to the pawn shop, pays off the bills that he had to pay, pays the interest that he had on the previous items, and it continues. And every now and then he'd have a little extra money. He'd get an item back out of the pawn shop, and the cycle would continue. So he'd keep doing this cycle with the pawn shop. Now, he was just buying himself time all the way around. But for the longest time, he kept getting really good uh, loan amounts on the items he was taking, because he kept paying off the loans, or he kept paying the interest and finding a way to do it, because he kept telling me, oh well, I know they're going to sell this item for $150. They'll probably give me 100 or 125, but I could take something just as similar just to go sell it to the pawn shop and only get 50 to $75, something like that, because we had exchanges like that occasionally. um but my point is, where I'm getting coming from here is, he was getting better treatment because he always paid the interest on his loans. And that's where we're at with this deficit spending, right? We're always paying the interest on our loans, which means people are willing to borrow from us. Same thing with savings bonds, right? And that's part of where um, the borrowing comes from. And you don't think about it, but I'm sure a lot of you, like myself and other friends and family that I talked to over the years, when we were kids, you know, we were given, sometimes, instead of actual gifts for birthday, Christmas, or whatever, um, it was savings bonds, because they were at one time really, really good interest. You would buy a bond for half value, and say you bought a $50 savings bond, you'd pay 25 up front, and in like 7 years, it had earned enough interest to be uh, worth its full value, and it would continue to gain interest over the years. Now, at some point, they really lowered the bond interest down to where it's like 15 or 20 years before it equals full value now, and I don't think bonds are as big of a gift at this point. But I remember years and years of getting at least one bond a year, because they had been such a good investment. And maybe I'm in the minority in remembering things like that, but that's how the U.S. government pays its bills, right? And when I say pay the interest, or we have to pay out on the interest on the money we borrow, that includes things like savings bonds. That's kind of how the tie-in here is. So if I had a $50 savings bond today and I went and go cash it in, well, they would give me the $50, right? Or whatever, however much it had earned in interest from when it was bought to now. And that would be them paying the interest due, right? And that is where, like, the tariff money comes in. When it hits the account, it goes out to pay things like that. And if there's no money there, because there's never any money there, because we are in deficit spending, technically the U.S. government, it's always moving money around, borrowing here, borrowing there, borrowing from other countries, trying to just keep things shuffled around. Okay. Um, So where I was going with all of this was talking about Donald Trump and the credit cards and the tariffs. I kind of went off on a tangent there, but if he's really wanting to help um, fix the economy and fix affordability, he'd get rid of the tariffs and make things more affordable. Now, we are still waiting for a Supreme Court decision on the tariffs, about whether or not they're even legal and what that would look like, as far as how they have to be repaid. Now, I'm still convinced that if that money has to be repaid to the companies that bought it or that paid them initially, that they're just going to end up putting it on their bottom line, calling it profits, and moving on. That would not surprise me in the least. Okay. I mean, that's just how big business operates. They're always looking for ways to add to the profits. Now, Donald Trump was asked by a reporter about the tariffs and the rebate checks and was asked point blank, uh, so when can American citizens expect these $2,000 tariff rebate checks? And he kind of looks a little confused. He's like, "Did I say that? Did I say we were doing the checks? Oh well, we're doing tremendously with these tariffs. We're making so much money with them. The tariff rebates. They'll be coming. They'll be coming." And the point there is, he didn't even remember that he made these promises. Yet MAGA holds on to every word Donald Trump says. They act like it is the word of God himself. It's just ridiculous. Donald Trump doesn't remember the promises he makes to him. He just says whatever idea pops in his head in the moment that it happens because he knows it's going to be a good clip. It's going to be a headline. It's going to be positive press. That's all he cares about. He comes out and says, "I'm giving you guys $2,000 rebate checks." Everybody cheers. Everybody's happy. He looks like a hero. And then when he comes down to nut cutting time and he's got to actually cut the check, well, we got to look into doing it. Don't know when they're going to really come out. They're coming out down the road. And he ignores it, or he says, "Well, did I really say that?" Now, some of that could be the dementia. We've been dealing with the fact that he is not well. He's just not. He is forgetful. I talked about it on yesterday's podcast. He had this meeting with the in the Oval Office with all these oil execs, and at one point he just gets up in mid meeting, wanders over to the window, kind of looking out. Oh, is this where the opening to the ballroom is going to be? Like he had completely lost the plot about what they were even there talking about, and just his brain shifted to, oh, construction ballroom. Okay, we're gonna go look at that now. He's kind of I think he's being treated for dementia, probably with an IV infusion. We've been talking about the bruising on his hands. He was recently on Fox News again, and you could see bruises on both hands, kind of poorly covered up with makeup. And I think the reason his hands are bruising so bad is that he is getting IV treatments. Now, if you can't get a good vein in the arm, a lot of times they move to the hands, and your hands bruise. And when you're older, specifically somebody on as much blood thinner as Donald Trump claims he is on, which is 325 milligrams of aspirin daily, which is 4 times what the recommended dose for somebody that they're worried about potentially having a heart attack. Um, if he's on that much, he could be on something else, and him saying that he's on aspirin is his way of covering it. Maybe they didn't tell him. Maybe he's getting a pill of something else, because it wouldn't surprise me that they have to lie to him to tell him what he's actually then rather than tell him what it really is. Maybe he's taking a prescription strength blood thinner of some kind that's not aspirin, and they're just telling him it's aspirin so he'll actually take the medicine. Well, it's only 325 milligrams of aspirin. It's good for you, blah, blah, blah. You see, Donald Trump, being the egomaniac he is and the narcissist that he is, he wants to believe he's in perfect health. So you tell him he's got to start taking these other meds for these other symptoms and other problems, he's going to have a problem with it. But if you tell him, well, it's just simple aspirin, he might be okay with it. Well, it's just preventative. It's preventative aspirin to make sure you don't develop these other problems. That would make some sense. Donald Trump is not doing very well. I say it a lot, but I don't believe he makes it to the end of 2028, to the end of his term. Now, I was talking to a coworker just today, and she was asking, when are we going to be rid of Donald Trump? When is he going to be gone? For all of the illegal things he is doing, for everything he is attempting to do, for all of it. And the answer to that is complex, but the big part of it is 2029, January 20th, 2029, at the end of his term, if he lives that long. Now, the Republicans are the ones who should be calling Donald Trump to task, and I think they might. Um, I still think that the Epstein files are going to be the reason that Donald Trump gets removed from office. I really do. And I think that once a bombshell picture or super incriminating piece of evidence comes out that they can't refute, um, comes out and says, "Hey, this proves Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. He did horrible things to children." I think like 90% of the MAGA base will turn on Donald Trump. You're still going to have some of the bootlickers, but the bulk of them would turn on Donald Trump because they actually care about kids. In their own weird, twisted way, they believe what they are doing is for the betterment of society for kids. They're wrong in a lot of ways. But one of the reasons they pushed so hard to release the Epstein files was because of children, because they were convinced it was nothing but Democrats doing all of these horrible things to kids, and they wanted the proof that that was right. Now, one of the things that could come out in the Epstein files, and I think would be a slam dunk against him, would be something like a picture of Donald Trump with an underage girl in a compromising position that you can't refute, but also having somebody else who is still alive in the room. And what I mean by that is, let's say Bill Clinton's in the files, and there is a photo of Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and a victim of Epstein in a compromising position on, say, Donald Trump's lap. And I don't know that that's what's actually there, but if if there's a picture like that that exists that shows Bill Clinton in the same room with Donald Trump with an underage victim in a compromising position where that proves Bill Clinton can come out and say, uh, yeah, that's a legit photo. And maybe Bill Clinton's a bad example, but you know what I mean. You get somebody who could come out and verify that the photo is legit beyond taking just MAGA's word, or not MAGA's word for it, the DOJ's word, or the Epstein files, or the House Oversight Committee, or whoever released the photo. Besides accepting that as just truth, if you have somebody else who could verify the photo's authenticity by saying, "I was right there when the photo was taken. I'm in that photo. I remember that. Yes, it's true." That might be enough for MAGA to turn on Donald Trump. Now, when the Republicans ultimately turn on Donald Trump, what I think is going to happen here is they are going to impeach him. And when they impeach him, it is going to start a snowball effect, right? If they use the Epstein files, or potentially they could use Venezuela, or maybe Greenland, or something like that, and they move on Donald Trump, you're going to see even more MAGA members of Congress dropping out. Like when the Republican Party decides to turn on Donald Trump and they remove him completely, being connected to MAGA, saying things like "Make America Great Again" are going to disappear from the Republican platform. They're just going to. They are going to be moving away completely from Donald Trump because they are going to have come to the conclusion that it is a losing strategy. Now, when do they get to that point? Well, like I said, either when that compromising photo of Donald Trump comes out, where he is shown 100% connected to uh, Epstein, and they can't walk away from it, they can't back from it. That might be it. Depending on how things go with Venezuela, potentially that could be the thing where they move against him there, or it could be because he's been talking about Greenland again. And just yesterday, he comes out and says, well, when it comes to Greenland, they're either going to join us the easy way or we can do it the hard way. Now, the easy way is probably talking about the idea I think I talked about in either yesterday's podcast or the day before, where he floated this idea of having $10,000 to $100,000 payments for every resident of Greenland, which could be anywhere from half a billion to $6 billion. There's like 57,000 residents in Greenland, um, and that he's trying to basically buy them off to get them to come to the United States. But why would they? Why would they want to come to the United States? There's no logical reason for them to do it. They are part of Denmark. They have universal health care, and they're in a better position, and they're pretty much left alone. But Donald Trump wants Greenland, and he wants it defensively. And something he said, and I think this was from that same press conference where he talked about doing it the easy way or the hard way. But I'm not sure exactly where this clip came from. He was asked, why do we need to own Greenland? We already have a military base there. Couldn't we just build up our defenses there and cover it that way and do the same thing and work with our allies? And he comes back with, he goes, well, when you own something, you defend it a lot stronger. You have to own it. When you're renting, you don't really care. So he's looking at it like a property deal, like being a tenant or a landlord situation. But that also is very telling because that means we have bases all across the world. In a lot of our allied countries, we have bases. And does that mean he doesn't view them as defensible? Like we shouldn't defend them? If something happens to our allies and we have troops in that country, are we not to go help them? This whole thing is not well thought out by Donald Trump, but that's typical Donald Trump. He doesn't think ahead, he doesn't think things through. Now, we are also hearing that he is talking to the Pentagon and he is asking his generals to come out and draw up plans for a military invasion of Greenland. And they're pushing back right now. They're saying, "Yeah, we really can't do that. That's not something we can do because of our allies and our NATO alliance and things like that." But he basically says he doesn't care. He is considering a full-scale invasion of Greenland militarily. Now, it wouldn't take much for us to invade Greenland. It really wouldn't. But the infrastructure to do what he wants to do in Greenland, which is basically, it's all about natural resources, kind of like Venezuela was all about oil. Um, and he wants to go after rare earth minerals, which are abundant in Greenland. And he doesn't think that Denmark should have control over where those rare earth minerals go and how they are used, etc. He thinks he should just get control. So if they do some kind of military invasion of Greenland, that may be a bridge too far for Congress, for congressional Republicans. They may have to make a move and remove Donald Trump just because uh, he's going after an ally. Now, Donald Trump doesn't care if it pulls us out of NATO or it breaks apart NATO. He doesn't care. Why? Because NATO is something that he is looking at that is going to tell him no, right? And because NATO doesn't work the way he thought it did. He kept talking about how he was going to get the NATO countries to pay more, to pay more, to pay more. Like they were putting money into some kind of shared checking account, and they don't. What he kept saying they needed to pay more and pay their fair share is there is a rule as part of NATO is that every country is supposed to spend at least a certain percentage of their GDP, which is their gross domestic product, which is basically the total sum of your economy for your country, that they are supposed to spend a significant amount, or it's like 2% or something of their GDP on defense. That's it. Now we spend like 20 or 30% or something like that. It's a lot. But they weren't paying nearly as much as we were. He kept saying, well, they got to pay their fair share. And the way he kept talking about it made me believe that he thinks the NATO accounts are something like a shared checking account. That I think he was expecting to be able to go in there and find a way to grift off that account because everything with Donald Trump is a grift. And when NATO's not doesn't actually operate that way, and because of their joint alliance, they can A, tell him no about certain things, and B, because of varying things with NATO, there's Article 5, which is an attack against one is an attack against all. Because of everything going on in Ukraine and the number of times there have been near misses and incidents with the surrounding countries around Ukraine, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not Article 5 would be invoked and about us having to go to the aid of those NATO countries militarily. And Donald Trump doesn't want to do it, mostly because he just doesn't want somebody else to tell him what to do. Donald Trump has never been one to accept any being told what he is supposed to do and when. He always wants to be deemed as the one in control. So he doesn't care if NATO breaks apart. If he were to invade Greenland, NATO would potentially collapse. And some people are thinking I might be, talk like that's um, hyperbole, or oh, you're just fear mongering. Well, no, because one of the things is when Article 5 gets invoked, we are supposed to honor that and come to Greenland's defense. But how do we come to Greenland's defense? Well, technically Denmark, but same thing. How do we come to the defense of Greenland or Denmark, like, from ourselves? Well, the way you would do that would be by not attacking them, but you're attacking an ally. But see, Donald Trump doesn't care about partnerships or allies. He will stab anybody in the back if he thinks it will get him what he wants. Now, Donald Trump was speaking the other day, and when basically was asked about international law and things like that, he basically said the only limit to his power is his own morality. Not mortality, but morality. And Donald Trump doesn't have any morality. If he thinks the upper limit to anything he can do is just whether or not he thinks it's good or bad, that is, that's not the right way for a president to act. And I don't know why MAGA continues to support him, other than, as a creator on TikTok pointed out, they've completely lost the plot, and that they believe siding against Donald Trump makes you a liberal. That you can't be conservative, you can't be a member of the MAGA movement, you can't be, you know, on the right, that you have to be a liberal hippie if you side against Donald Trump in anything. And that's just not true, because you can be on the same side politically and disagree. But they have gotten to the point where a lot of them still make Donald Trump their entire personality, because they're convinced that the only people who would be against Donald Trump are liberals. And that's just not true. Before 2016, before Donald Trump won the Republican nomination, um, there were multiple branches of Republicanism. You had the Tea Party. You kind of had MAGA to an extent, but MAGA wasn't nearly as prevalent before Donald Trump at all. And then you had uh, just the Tea Party and other groups that were trying to be more grassroots Republican conservative. And you can be part of the conservative side without being a liberal and without being a Trump supporter, but they don't realize it. They've missed that plot point at this point, because Donald Trump has been the face of the Republican Party for now going on a decade. And he has been pretty much holding uh, the reins when it comes to Republicans and MAGA, etc. Um, and ultimately, he could potentially be gone. Now, I've been talking about them going away from Donald Trump because of Greenland, maybe Venezuela, and I do think that's possible. Just like I said with the Epstein files, um, that they end up ultimately moving on when it gets to a point when the public outcry is large enough that they have to make a move, right? And then they would. Now, when it comes to Venezuela, there were some developments with Venezuela. He holds this meeting with the oil companies yesterday, and they're talking about all things Venezuelan oil and all of this. And Donald Trump comes out and basically says the United States should be in charge of Venezuela's oil. That we're going to get 20 to 50 million barrels, I think, a day of their oil. He's going to get to we're going to get to sell. He's going to get to control where the profits go. And that's not how any of that works. We do not have multiple accounts like that within the Treasury. All money for the federal government goes into one joint account, technically, and from there it gets dispersed out to the varying departments that have to pay their budgets. And again, when we get money in, it goes to pay bills, it goes to pay interest, it goes to pay out bonds, all of those things. Or it's just paying bills. But Donald Trump doesn't care about any of that. He thinks he should get control of the uh, money from Venezuela, the sale of Venezuelan oil. But then he also filed an executive order about this too. And this one's a little confusing because, as I've said before, I don't know how he thinks we just get control of Venezuela's oil and we get to decide how it is spent and all of that. That doesn't make any sense. But again, we're dealing with Donald Trump. That this executive order would basically say that the money that comes in, it kind of says exactly what I was just saying, that it's going to get set aside and spent how Donald Trump feels it should be spent. And it talks about building up infrastructure and helping Venezuela and rebuilding Venezuela and doing these things. Well, one, how is that America first? It's not. Two, why does he think we get any money from the sale of Venezuelan oil? That is their property. They should get that unless they have agreed to uh, to give it to us, and I don't believe they have. Um, that'd be like me going to my neighbor's house, taking their lawnmower, putting a for sale sign on it in my yard, and saying, "Well, I got to keep the money because I'm selling it for you." It was never mine to sell in the first place. But see, Donald Trump doesn't believe in laws or anything. He thinks he just gets to do whatever he wants, that he has absolute immunity and nobody should be able to question him about anything he does. Donald Trump wants absolute power to do anything and everything. And for whatever reason, Republicans in Congress and the MAGA side hasn't decided that it's bad. Now, if you flip the question around on them and you were asking them, well, what if Joe Biden did this? Oh, they'd have a field day. What if Kamala Harris did this? They would have a field day. If she was president and doing half the things Donald Trump was currently doing, they would be calling for her impeachment, her arrest, and everything. They would be going absolutely bonkers. But again, because they are convinced that you can't be against Donald Trump and still be a conservative, that they've lost the plot, right? At this point, they don't know what else to do. So they're just going to keep bootlicking and backing Donald Trump and doing all of these things for now because they feel they have to. Now, ultimately, at some point, Donald Trump is going to be gone. Whether that is because Republicans have finally had enough and they've kicked him out, which I think could happen, And I don't know if we've gotten to that point yet, but it could happen because of the Epstein files, because of Venezuela, because of Greenland, like I've talked about. And that would mean that they impeach and remove him. Now, we've talked about impeachment before, but if they impeach him, which is just criminal charges brought against him in the House, I do not expect those charges to pass the House of Representatives unless they know they have the votes in the Senate to remove him. Okay? They're going to go into it knowing full well that he is going to be removed. And when that happens, and Donald Trump, if he does get removed, they're saying, okay, we are moving on 2028 with JD Vance. And JD Vance is now going to be our guy. Now, I've already had people asking me, well, Eric, isn't that worse? Isn't JD Vance being president going to be much worse than Donald Trump? The answer to that is no. Okay. JD Vance is not going to be worse than Donald Trump for multiple reasons. One, MAGA doesn't like JD Vance at all. He does not hold the MAGA party the way Donald Trump does. Not even close. Okay. That's problem one for JD Vance. Problem two, uh, not only does he not hold sway over the MAGA party, the Republicans in Congress don't like him. He doesn't hold sway over his own party, not the way Donald Trump does. Look at what happened earlier this week with Donald Trump. They went to override his vetoes on two bills in the House of Representatives. Now, those two bills were passed basically unanimously through both chambers of Congress. And they come back and they had passed with a big enough margin that they could have overrode his veto. And they come back after he vetoes them, they vote on him a second time, and suddenly they both fail. They could not override the veto because enough members of Congress said, oh, Donald Trump doesn't like this? Yeah, fuck it, we're not doing it. And that's a problem for uh, JD Vance. He doesn't have that kind of sway at all, not even close. And if I was JD Vance, and thank God I'm not, but if I was JD Vance and I'm watching what's unfolding, and say my party just decided to move on who is arguably the most charismatic Republican they have had since Reagan. And when I say Donald Trump is charismatic, it's not that he is charismatic toward everybody, but he has probably the biggest charisma that at least appeals to the biggest base that MAGA has had probably since, or that the Republicans have had since Reagan. While he wasn't a perfect Republican, or wasn't even a perfect president, George W. Bush didn't have that big of a pull. And nobody since Reagan was able to do what Donald Trump did, which was reignite the fire in the Republican Party. Now, JD Vance just doesn't have it. And if I'm JD Vance and I just watch them remove Donald Trump, I'm going to be watching my P's and Q's and I'm going to be, being very careful about how I'm proceeding when it comes to doing anything. Because there's always a chance that they just said, oh, yeah, well, we've broken with history and we've removed a president. Then at that point, it's out the window. Because they've never done it before, there's always that question of, well, will they finally do it this time for the first time? And it makes you question. But if your own party kicked out a president of the United States for the first time, and you're the VP after, you're going to be looking over your shoulder going, oh, fuck, am I next? Am I next? Are they going after me next? You're going to be looking at it, trying to figure out whether or not uh, everything you do is up to snuff. And Congress is going to have a lot of pull over JD Vance. I really believe that. Now, before people get all up in arms, just because JD Vance would move up, everybody else does not move up a step in the line of succession. JD Vance would get to appoint his own VP. it would not mean that uh, Mike Johnson would become VP. It just doesn't. That's not how that works. So you don't have to worry about Mike Johnson screwing everything up by being the vice president. That's not that's unless that's the person that JD Vance would pick, and I don't think it would be. There's nothing to worry about with Mike Mike Johnson. It's just not going to happen. Um, or they could 25th Amendment him, and that's where the VP goes to Congress and he says, "Hey, uh, you know, we got a problem with the president. He's not healthy. XYZ. I think he's got dementia. Here's all my proof." And Congress could hold a vote and say, "Yeah, you know what? Donald Trump's not healthy. Until he can prove to us that he's healthy enough, JD is the acting president." And then it would become a fight. But if you do either of those two things, Donald Trump is going to burn the Republican Party down around him. Now, speaking of burning the party down around him, somebody else on TikTok, and I can't remember this creator's name, pointed out that because of some of the dumb stuff JD Vance has said about this ICE shooting of Renee Good in Minneapolis, um, that he thinks Donald Trump is setting JD Vance up to be the fall guy. That maybe they tried to pressure Vance to resign to bring in somebody different, uh, maybe an heir apparent to MAGA, um, because even Donald Trump realizes that JD Vance isn't the guy he needs right there at VP. And that's an interesting take. Um, but this creator was right about the stuff JD Vance is saying is not helping this administration. Now, JD Vance has said that the officer involved has full immunity, which really isn't true because qualified immunity only applies if it was a good shoot, and it does not look like it was a good shoot. Now, I've seen multiple videos of this interaction, and it appears from uh, what I've seen that an ICE agent was leading into the car. Basically, they had an exchange, and then he steps back. He's away from the car, and she pulls away and tries to leave the scene when this guy's partner pulls out his gun and shoots 3 or 4 times and hits her in the face every time. Now, I'm seeing some other videos, and apparently there is a cell phone footage video, could be a body cam footage video, that it appears to be that to confirm that she was trying to pull away, basically saying, "I don't want to talk to you. I don't want anything to do." She was laughing, joking, smiling. Did not appear to be in any way from her body language that she was any kind of a threat. And then after she pulls away and she gets shot, you hear somebody, which it sounds like it might have been the shooter from what I've seen on this clip, uh, call her a fucking bitch. You just shot somebody in the face and killed her, and that's how you react? Yeah, that really shows your innocence there. Now, could this guy be charged with state level crimes? Of course. Now, the FBI is not really cooperating with this investigation. And I saw another video on TikTok. Don't know if it was I don't remember the creator for this one either, unfortunately, and I haven't been able to verify that this video was legitimately of the vehicle we thought it was. But it was an SUV that did appear to be same make and model as the one that was involved that Renee Good was driving, and it did appear to have bullet holes in it. And it appeared to be being towed away, potentially as evidence. However, if it was being hauled away by the FBI to preserve the crime scene or the evidence, they were doing a piss poor job because windows were down, there was no tarp over anything. It was just as is on a flatbed of a truck, trying to contaminate the evidence inside, potentially. That's at least what it looked like. Again, I don't know for a fact that that video was legit and that it was of the same incident, but playing on the radio in the car that was driving next to this tow truck, you could hear them talk about the incident that had taken place in Minneapolis. This does seem like the FBI is trying to cover something up. Now, the problem with all of this, when it comes to the FBI, is we've put our faith in places and institutions like the FBI, the ATF, even ICE up until this administration, that we, for the most part, put our faith that they would do things the right way. And if they're not, there needs to be a reckoning when this administration is gone. There needs to be a house cleaning. And top to bottom, these these agencies and wholesale, they need to be gone through, figure out who is complicit, who is doing things to help out Donald Trump, who's willing to violate chain of evidence and uh, cover things up, all to protect Donald Trump, and they need to be gone. And we need to hire people who have the integrity to do what is necessary. We don't need uh, an FBI, a DOJ that is willing to cover up the actions of this administration and other criminals. And now we've also heard about ICE agents, that a lot of these ICE agents are piss poor trained, and we're seeing some reaction videos. I saw another video where it appeared this woman was, very strongly giving her opinion as to what she thought about ICE. And the ICE officer basically grabbed her phone and shoved her down. It was trying to take her phone, all because she was saying something he didn't like. And that's a problem. These ICE agents, they're picking up anybody and everybody who's willing to do the job, whether they can meet the physical requirements or not, and whether they have any law enforcement training or not. And in fact, remember, ICE isn't law, they are law enforcement, but they are not the same as, say, local or state police. They're not there to do just routine traffic stops. They're there for immigration enforcement. And this woman was not an immigrant. They had no reason to suspect she was an immigrant. And basically, they opened fire for some reason. It's not even clear as to why they opened fire on her, other than she was trying to leave and get herself out of that situation. ICE is out of control, and they need to be reeled in when it's all said and done. There was another video that came out I saw where this was a woman on the phone recording what was going on around her as she is on the phone with her local 911 dispatch because ICE is trying to enter her home with no warrant uh, and trying to break her door down, all to get her DoorDash driver, who was an immigrant. And they had no warrant, no reason to detain this person, this DoorDasher, no reason to suspect that this DoorDasher potentially even was here uh, undocumented, illegally. And basically, they were saying, screw your Fourth Amendment rights of search and seizure. We're going to come in anyway. They don't care. It's not about due process with them. But when they do scream about due process, they're on the receiving end. Republicans and MAGAs love to scream about due process and unfair treatment when they got charged after January 6th for the crimes they committed. When they did get due process, they were allowed an attorney. They had trials. They were sentenced for the crimes they committed. and they had to go sit in jail. They screamed and hollered about it being unfair and a violation of rights and due process and all of those things. They only don't seem to care when it's people they don't like, people of color, um, immigrants, etc. And that's just how MAGA is. And there's no cure for that other than to, enact policies and legislation and just a whole bunch of social norms where we push them back under the rocks to where they at least have to keep it hidden and make it so unwelcoming for them that they realize that there's no place in this country for people who think like them. All right, that's going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast for today. I'm going to be back tomorrow with another episode because there's always stuff to talk about. And I hope you have a great day, and we will talk to you again tomorrow.